Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I think we should start, and Mr. Gill will join us a little bit later. Welcome to the Astana International Exchange Capital Market Forum. Many of you have traveled long distances to be here, and we are very honored and privileged to have you here. Without further delay, I would like to ask and welcome Deputy Prime Minister, Ministry of Finance, Mr. Kunanbayev, to give an opening speech for our forum. Please welcome.
I thank Renat, dear participants of the forum, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to say that I'm very glad to see all of you, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this forum, to Mr. Akylzhan and others. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, this year, this forum is happening during challenging times. We see high inflation on the global market, along with volatility and growing uncertainty. Despite that fact, the economy of Kazakhstan is growing. In the 5 months of this year, the GDP growth was 4.6%. We see sustainable dynamics in the real sector of the economy. There is acceleration in growth of services and also increase of export amounts. CapEx has grown, investment into CapEx has grown by over 20%, and the revenues to the budget have reached 107% of the plan. We've accumulated significant reserves, so we've got the monetary reserves. That is a good cushion. The total amount is about $800 billion, including the fund, and we have a clear understanding of what we should do, and our experience of the previous crisis shows us that, and we need good coordination of the actions by the government, financial institutions, and private sector. We have an Foreign Investors Council under the President, which is a good platform to resolve challenges related to improving business climate and any individual challenges. We've also created the Domestic Entrepreneurs Council, and they work on coming up with proposals related to business and socio-economic development of the country in general. It's important to respond in a timely manner to shocks and global trends. This year alone, we've introduced the program to increase the revenues of the population, the action plan to stabilize economic situation in the country, the import substitution program, as well as conceptual document on attracting the investment and developing private businesses. In order to ensure sustainable development of the economy and increase the income of the population, the President instructed to develop a new Kazakhstan economic policy. The key factors are reduction of the direct participation of the government in the economy, modernization of the sectors, ensuring financial stability, developing human capital, innovations, and so on. Distinguished participants of the forum, in conclusion, I would like to wish everyone productive work and great discussions. Hopefully, the proposals you come up with will be very useful in our joint work. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. Deputy Prime Minister. And this year, the topic of our forum is economic transformation, inclusive growth, and sustainability. And as the Deputy Prime Minister have noted, we chose this topic for a reason, because we are going through times of uncertainty in economic, in political life. And there are a few areas that we would like to discuss. That's the macro outlook on the economy of the world, on Kazakhstan, and whether there are still investing opportunities in Kazakhstan. So let me start from introducing our speakers today. I will start from the Minister of Economy of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Mr. Alibek Kuantyrov. Mr. Akylzhan Baimagambetov, Deputy CEO of the National Bank of the Republic of Kazakhstan. Saule Zhakayeva, CEO of the Citigroup Kazakhstan. Timur Kunanbayev, Head of CIS Coverage, JP Morgan. Mr. Almassadam Satkaliyev, CEO of the Sovereign Wealth Fund Samruk-Kazyna. And Nick Kaufmann, Head of Equity Capital Markets and Syndicate, Wood&Co. Hopefully we'll have Mr. Dr. Indermit Gill, Vice President, Equitable Growth, Finance and Institutions from World Bank Group. Let's start our first panel session, and I presume a lot of you agree that we have come through some rough times. The pandemic changed how we live, changed our personal life, our economic, financial lives. We actually learned from socializing and working in a new environment. And I think that's not the last challenge we're gonna have or we are having lately. We definitely all remember we had tragic events of January. So there was a request from the country, of the transformation and change. And we would like to first discuss the change that is happening in the country from the economic perspective. So the first question is to the Minister Kuantyrov. Could you give brief outline of the economic development of the country and what are the further steps that we would like to take?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for being invited here, and I'm greeting Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Kunanbayev, and Mr. Khairat Nematic for organizing such a great event. Thank you, Renat, for the question. So, as His Honor Deputy Prime Minister said, for 5 months we had a 4.6% growth, and actually we had to adjust our macroeconomic forecast in March because of the January and February events, down to 1.8 percentage points from 3.9 to 2.1% of GDP growth, unfortunately, and we also had to adjust the budget. But some additional margin coming from the oil sphere that goes directly to the national fund, so it's going to be used throughout the year as an additional transfer to the budget, and so we are going to support the economy and give a great stimulus package, which partially can be compared to the stimulus package that we had in 2020 during the pandemic, and we actually have all the resources to support the economy. And not only that, so this is a more conservative approach, so we had to adjust the budget, we had to adjust to the macroeconomic forecast, but in general, since it's a more conservative approach, we generally expect the economic growth of 3 to 4%, since if we have the same optimistic figures for 6 months, so let's wait for the first 10 days of July, then we are going to be more sure to grow more than 4%. So in general, this is a time for opportunities, and in general, we are waiting some stable and sustainable growth through this year, notwithstanding the general events and consequences that the globe is having, and nevertheless, Kazakhstan is implementing the reforms, and we did the same during the pandemic time. So even in being in difficult situations and taking into account all these consequences in the global economy and in the regional economy, our government and the whole public administration system, it is implementing the reforms, which is also affirmed and considered very positively by the international rating agencies. And as you might know, just about 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, the Fitch rating actually it affirmed our rating with a stable forecast. The same was done by the S&P rating agency in March, and we were upgraded last year also by Moody's. So in general, our expectations are good, and we are hoping, and actually we are working on making the economy more stable and sustainable.
Thank you, the Minister, for setting the scene on this discussion. Yes, I would like to ask the next question to the Mr. Satkaliyev. One of the topics that always attract people to our forum is the privatization. So if you could give an update on the privatization program, that would be, I think, very interesting for our participants. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Definitely, we are not seeing the best time for capital markets now, and there is a decrease in interest of investment society in emerging markets and economies. However, we understand that there will never be the right time if just sit and do nothing. Here is what the Samruk-Kazyna plan to do to work with the current situation. As you know, the main statement of our development strategy is reduction share of Samruk-Kazyna in local economy and implementation of our comprehensive privatization plan. February this year, government approved new criteria for our assets to be included in the list of privatization. The philosophy of this criteria based on idea to promote inclusive economy and create competitive markets. Following these key criteria, we already increased level of our companies for privatization from current 105 to 250. And our planned list of these companies already presented to the government, and we are waiting for approval. And we will be ready for execute these privatization plans by different ways, and which includes direct negotiations with strategic investors and selling through bidding procedure, and of course IPO and SPO as the main approach for privatization program. Now let me switch to Russian to make some addressed messages and announcement for targeted audience.
Sure.
Уважаемые коллеги, дорогие
Distinguished colleagues, dear friends, thank you very much for organizing this event, which allows not only sharing views, but also taking this advantage to announce about the plans for the qualified investors, for the stakeholders, for the investment community. And we would definitely like to take this opportunity here. I would like to briefly advise you about our portfolio companies, which are well known to the potential participants of the process, to make certain statements. Number one, regarding Air Astana, the company is most prepared among all the other portfolio companies for IPO, but understanding the current status related to the conflict in the European part of the continent, inter alia, together with the other shareholder Biosystems, we come to the understanding that most likely IPO of Air Astana will not be efficient. Therefore, we did a lot of deep work with our consultants and investment banks, and now we will be waiting for another investment window. This is why we started active discussions with the potential strategic investors who can propose certain conditions in terms of their participation in the process as anchor investors or investing in equity of the company. The similar approach is going to be used in terms of Kazakh Air. We decided not to implement the IPO of the company given the scope, but given the regional status and pretty efficient development strategy of the company and quite good outcomes despite the pandemic this year. We are now in the process of privatization and negotiations with the key players at the market. We signed NDAs with a number of lead international air companies, and we will definitely advise the public about the outcomes of this work. Kazakh Gas was announced as a possible IPO in 2023. It's a young, quite ambitious company, and they have actively engaged into this work. But we now realize that the company now needs to focus on expanding the resource base, on implementation of major infrastructure projects in the gas sector that have been included in the national development plans, including gasification of Kazakhstan and development of export markets. And they have to do a lot of work to properly regulate the sector in relation to domestic pricing, relations with the market players, and the possible establishment of the integrated market at the Eurasian environment. As a result of this work, we obviously expect that the company will go IPO, and we will advise the public about the progress of the process. As for Samruk Energy, initially the intention was to sell it to the strategic investors. Then we looked at possible IPO. Samruk Energy is our key electricity generating company, and at the level of the company, we got the endorsement by the government to split the company into two parts. The company has a lot of assets related to coal generation. We are going to split the company into the assets with renewables, with pure assets, clean assets that will incorporate the distribution networks and retail trading of electricity. And the coal-based assets will be separated out to have their own development strategy, and the part of the company which we call Green Samruk, which is going to be oriented at renewables development, reduction of the carbon footprint, with huge plans for the renewables generation plans, and to develop the capturing and storage capacities, including accumulation of power. So as soon as we complete the reorganization process, we will propose this part of the company for potential IPO. We have this plan, and we have a clear vision about the energy sector. And this is our intention. As for our key asset, which is Kazmuna Gas, we are now formally announcing the IPO of the company during this year using two platforms, AIX and Kasei. Thank you. We carried out a deep analysis of the structure and interest by the local investors, and we are now doing the homework to estimate the market, and we see huge potential of the company in terms of development, with a good story, big plans for energy transition, for the export route development and diversification of business. The key aspect of the IPO and the specificity of it would be to the wide engagement of the local people into the process. We are planning to do it both through the awareness-raising campaign and through some tools such as digital solutions by the brokers, various platforms such as Kaspost, and we will also engage the option of using mobile apps, when through the mobile app any registered user can get access to the trading by KMG auctions shares, and for the remote places we can use Kaspost offices. That is, we are oriented at a wide range of retail qualified institutional investors, and we are inviting all the local people to participate in the process. Thank you very much.
AX and AFC are very supportive of the process and will put all our effort. I would like to continue with our panel session. So next question is Mr. Baimagambetov is to you. We see that a lot of the central banks all over the globe are increasing the rates, And you recently announced that the interest will stay at the same level of 14%. So could you please give a little bit like overview on this decision?
Thank you, Renat, for the question. Dear participants, colleagues, it's my pleasure to be here. First of all, on behalf of the National Bank of Kazakhstan, let me thank you all of you for organizing this event and to inviting us to participate in it. I'm very glad to share with you the thoughts of Central Bank about the inflation forecast, GDP forecast. My colleagues prepare some presentation, some slides. If you don't mind, I will continue in Russian. Sorry for that. Yes.
First of all, about the external conditions, inflation pressure in the global economy is being strengthened since 2021, and as a result of very quickly recovery of the global economy due to the vaccination and refusal from lockdowns and various limitations, and continuing stimulating policy all over the world, which is being implemented by most of the countries. Another inflationary pressure is due to the food because of the poor weather conditions and implementation of geopolitical risks, which is the conflict in Europe. Speaking about the food prices, the FAO food price index reached the highest level since 1990 when the index was started. The misbalances were observed in other commodity markets, including commodities, fuels, including gas. The combination of all these factors to some extent formed the ideal inflationary storm, which tackled not only the food prices and fuel prices, but also ready-to-use goods prices. And as a result, we now observe that the hopes of many experts that inflation is temporary, which was very popular among the central banks in the first half of the last year, it's now disappearing, and we can see that the inflation in many countries of the world is increasing, reaching the historical maxima. At the same time, yes, the business activity is in the positive zone, but the level is pretty low. IMF reduced the forecast of the global economy growth for 2022 and for 2023 as well. And it is projected that the world economy will grow by 3.6% for 2 years in a row. As for the inflation, here you can see our inflation forecast. Kazakhstan is a small, open economy, which is at the same time engaged in wide economic relations with our neighbor, Russia, can feel the consequences of global and regional shocks. And if we come back to 2020, as a result of support to the economy by the National Bank, which totaled about 9% of GDP, as a result, the economy, after a pretty small reduction in 2020, grew in 2021 by 4.1%. That is, the growth was pretty quick. However, we could see that from the second half of last year, the inflation has accelerated, and we started to strengthen our monetary policy. You remember that last year we increased the interest rate 3 times to 57%. Inflationary pressure, unfortunately, continued to be felt, and one of the most important factors of the worsening of geopolitics, which resulted in reduction of the exchange rate and inflation. We could see that in March, the inflation from 7 to 8% grew to 12%, and in May to 14%. To minimize the consequences of the external shocks and preserve the price stability in local currency during the first days of the war, we increased the interest rate by 0.35 basic points to 13.5%, and we continued the same policy in April and increased the rate until 14%. That's exactly what you asked about, Renat. And we took some measures about the FX market, and we transferred it to inflation through interventions and other measures. And we can see that the rate is more or less close to the pre-war and last year levels. As for the projections, we as the National Bank, we can see the stability of the inflationary pressure under the external factors. And as for the internal factors, we can see that there are inflationary factors as well, which is the growing demand and pretty low, mild fiscal policy. And therefore, speaking about the short-term influence on inflation, some inertia price growth, we can observe the seasonal effect of the summer months, and a typical inflation of the last year can potentially restrain growth. But generally speaking, before the end of the year and in the next year, we expect that the growth of the real income of population, based on the statistics, is going to be quite positive. The consumer crediting and still stimulating fiscal policy will facilitate the acceleration of inflation, and some interruptions in logistics will obviously, and global food prices and fuel prices will have additional inflationary pressure. And these are the factors that would influence on inflation. As for the factors that will stop inflation, the government takes a number of measures at the food markets and in the consumer markets that it tries to restrain the food prices, and a number of measures were taken to regulate prices for utilities and energy resources that would have some disinflationary effect. And as a result, our forecast for 2022 is about 13 to 15%. And next year, we can expect that the inflation will gradually slow down based on the high base rate of 2022 and given the decisions taken regarding the base rate.
Plus, important factor is that we'll implement the counter-cyclical budgetary rules next year, and hopefully the budget will come to a more balanced policy. So our expected inflation in 2023 will be 7.5 to 9.5%. According to our forecast, the inflation will decrease in 2024. Maybe by the end of the year, it will still be outside the established corridor, but then it will fall within this corridor, so it'll probably be closer to the upper bound of the target corridor. As for our forecast for GDP and economic growth, we can see that according to our forecast, the dynamics of economic activities in Kazakhstan will vary from 2.8 to 3.8% of the GDP, and our forecast includes some probability of realization of the risks related to access of Kazakhstani products to export markets. And as the Minister of the Economy has mentioned, and as Mr. Yerlan has mentioned, the GDP growth is up to 4.6%, and that gives us some room to possibly change the forecast in the future to increase it. We have a positive fiscal impulse, a favorable commodity prices on the oil market. Well, certainly there are geopolitical risks. In 2023, we expect that the GDP growth will increase to 3.5 to 4.5% because of normalizing export-import supply chains. Hopefully, in this year, the economy will readjust to the new reality, and unless you restrict the business too much, they'll find the way. And I think that this will create certain push for the economy. We can also see that there is an increase of oil production due to OPEC Plus deal, and also we've given you the output gap graph. It'll probably be around 0 in 2022, and it will go into positive or pro-inflational zone in next 2023, and that will also stimulate the domestic demand. So for the central banks and market players in the current condition, they've got an understanding of the causality and other factors, and I think it's not only us, but other central banks have reviewed these factors as well. Thank you. Thank you for a very detailed presentation of the position of the National Bank, both in terms of inflation and economic growth.
We put the Kazakh economic outlook into a global scene. I would like to express our gratitude to the AFC, Astana International Financial Center, that is hosting this event, and ask the governor, Dr. Kelimbeetov, to give us the speech from the AFC perspective. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, если разрешите.
Thank you very much. Let me switch to Russian as well, because I think that the majority of the audience here will understand it quicker. First of all, I would like to thank all the participants. That's a great organization, especially in the post-COVID world. We don't see too many opportunities now when we have the Deputy Prime Minister, the National Bank, the Minister of Economy, Deputy Chairman of City of JP Morgan and Samruk and Baimagambetov in the same room. So I guess all the people who the economists usually ask questions are in the room. So I would like to draw some parallels. Last year, we presented a report to the president. We had the AIFC governance meeting. That's the event where we try to summarize the results for the year. That includes the Prime Minister, the Chairman of the National Bank, and the President oversees it, and it's usually very interesting to listen to that, to understand what's going to be done about economic growth in Kazakhstan and reforms and so on, because it's impossible for AFC to be successful and for the rest of economy not, and vice versa. And you know that AIFC has been part of the reforms since the very beginning, from 100 steps and 5 institutional reforms. But now I've been thinking that hopefully we are starting to answer questions today. So actually, frankly speaking, it's been 6 months since the beginning of the year, and there have been so many changes in the world that the Kazakhstani economy has proven to be sustainable. Although our colleagues were saying that the growth is slightly more or slightly less, budget has slightly more or slightly less money, but fortunately we've got the reserves. We're optimistic about the future from the standpoint of the budget deficit, the non-oil related budget deficit, and so on. So I think that there is an understanding of what needs to be done. The same goes for fiscal policy, foreign exchange policy. The financial sector has proven to be sustainable during COVID and in post-COVID period, despite the difficulties. So overall, macroeconomic situation looks good, and thank God. On the other hand, just during the previous session, which was more geopolitical in nature, there were many questions asked on what's next. And that question is probably more important because the government or the National Bank and other government bodies are responsible for doing something now, but what's next, it's subject to discussion for all of us. And the president yesterday and during his video address today has mentioned that he expects the economic community, the community of economists, academia, from experts, to hear something from the people who can formulate this policy. It's not just the president who is waiting for that answer, but the whole country is. What kind of economic reforms should be done? How will life change in certain time period? Because January events have given us a push to rethink the previous model of economic growth. The previous model is quite simple. It's well known. It was well described. It is the commodity-based economy. We produce the commodities, we invite the investors, we sell it, the investors pay taxes, some money goes to the national fund, then we redistribute it through the social policies, and it all seems good and well. But we understand that natural resources don't create too many jobs, and the demographic situation is such that we need a lot of jobs. Many people come to the job markets, they study at the universities, colleges, vocational schools, and they will enter the labor market soon, and we need to create jobs for them. And during the previous session, we had the ex-Prime Minister of Georgia, and he mentioned three main dimensions. And he said that we sometimes focus too much on the fiscal policy or monetary policy, and we think that we change the monetary policy and we'll reap the benefits. And Jacob Frankel has mentioned that. It doesn't happen this way. It is not about a single policy. It's about a complex of macroeconomic policy, structural reforms, and that's something that people would like to hear about. We do have many panel sessions in different dimensions of our project because speaking about sensible fiscal policy, we need to understand how will the taxes increase or decrease to motivate people to do something, or how we maintain low levels of deficit, how we manage debt. If we cannot spend too much, or we cannot transfer too much money out of the national fund like we think with the National Bank. But then the question is, how can we implement the national projects or different instructions, because that's all the result of a social requirement, social demand, because we need to create infrastructure, we need to create new sectors of the economy, and so on. In this sense, it's important to understand that there is social context of the things that we discuss. And today, the CEO of Samruk-Kazyna has mentioned that, and I think it's a very important message. First of all, we should say that we are very happy that AIX is the place to announce that important development. Although the IPO will be done in 2 exchanges, we are not jealous. It's good that we are one of the places, and that's good news. That's probably the first time when we come to privatization, not thinking about how well we'll be able to sell that, not thinking that we'll go to London, sell the shares, and that's great. And we did have that thinking in the past when some companies were listed and delisted, and I think that we probably need to write a new Kazakh story on the global capital markets. We do have the prerequisites. We did have the first IPO of Kazatomprom, also the Kaspi KZ issuance, and that's the new face of Kazakhstani economy. And the things that Mr. Satkaliyev mentioned today, although it seemed like some things are delayed or postponed and so and so, and then in that particular part we will enter the markets, and that might not be very impressive to global investors. Maybe the global investors are thinking about decarbonization or regulatory requirements and so on, but it should be impressive to us because we believe that this should be truly a people's IPO, because we need to create a sense of ownership among Kazakhstani people. And we remember the lessons of privatization in UK, where people had the ownership en masse, and we should work to avoid the same mistakes that happened to vouchers in the post-Soviet system or in Russia or in Kazakhstan, because it's very important for the population to have shares, to get this wealth so that people can understand that their wealth is growing along with the economic growth of the country. The second important thing that Mr. Satkaliyev has mentioned is the corporate governance and transparency issue. It's not only about making things right in the companies, clearing things up to make sure that the companies are easy to understand so that you can see the way the procurement works or economic flows are managed. It's also important to think about the way the companies work on decarbonization, how the company creates jobs, whether the companies can do that or there will be private market and the yellow pages format. That's also an important question. And the role of the structure structures directly owned by the states should probably decrease, because there should be some room, there should be competition rules, because we understand that in the previous economic model, this probably did not work well. There were always some bottlenecks that you could not get past. In some things, you couldn't go past certain stage, or some other niche was already occupied by someone else. And we think that the jobs will be created by SMEs, not by the state or the ministries. So all those niches that will be freed up will be taken by those businesses, and that's probably a prerequisite for a new social contract. So I would just like to congratulate everyone that we've got great news. We'll probably learn more. We'll learn more details. Yesterday, the president has mentioned also about our commitment to privatization process, and it's the story that cannot be done in 1 year. But there is a clear understanding and sequence of steps, and Samruk-Kazyna does have this vision. The government is working every day. They're discussing the matters of the future economic strategy, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but when Mr. Gill will speak in the last summary of the World Bank, he'll probably make people depressed, because we might be looking good short term, but we need to think about what we are going to do long term to make those changes happen in relation to diversification, creating competitive economy and inclusive model of economic growth. And certainly during other sessions, we'll also talk a lot about social mobility, about new tech models, about educational models, research models, decarbonization. So I invite you to participate in all our sessions that are available online. In many of those, there is a direct link to the social media. So thank you for participation. And let me finalize by saying that we are all optimistic about the future. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kunanbayev.
We had, I think, quite a rigorous discussion on the Kazakhstan and how we have reacted as a country for the January events. And now I would like to put that into a global context, right? And we cannot here avoid talking about the war that, as we said, that's happening in the European part of the continent, right? And then the sanction rhetoric that has developed around it. And I think there are other big factors and the global trends that are unfolding and that will have huge impact on the global economy. And I would like you, Dr. Gill, comment on this and give your overview. What are the macro factors that we should be looking for and we should be aware of?
Thank you very much, Chair. So first, I have to apologize for not being here in time. The second thing I wanted to do was quickly to tell you about how we are seeing changes in the world. We just put out this report. It's called the Global Economic Prospects Report. We put it out earlier this month, and I'd urge you to read it, right? The thing that we discovered when we were doing this was there's a lot of uncertainty in the world, and I think that just talking about what's going to happen in the world in 2022 is uncertain enough. So I'll quickly tell you exactly what were the main changes that we made, right? The first, I guess the short summary of the new numbers is that we've downgraded growth forecasts for 2022 for this year, for nearly 3/4 of all countries, right? The exceptions are mostly commodity exporters like Saudi Arabia and so on. And the exceptions to these commodity exporters are actually Russia and Ukraine, right? In the sense that their prospects have become downgraded. The growth forecast for the global economy has been cut by almost a third. The growth forecast for emerging markets and developing countries has also been cut by nearly a third. The only regions that we expect to do better as now than we thought back in January of 2022 was Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as the Middle East and North Africa, right? Those are the two things. Now, just to give you the 2 or 3 quick numbers that you might be interested in, for the global economy, we cut our forecast from 4.1% for this year to 2.9, right, which is about a third. For advanced economies, it was 3.8 to 2.6. For Kazakhstan, we cut it from 3.7 to 2.0, right, for this year. And for I would say that the biggest change was for Russia, where we cut our forecast from 2.0 at the beginning of the year to now to like -9 for this year. Okay, so a huge swing, about 11 percentage points. Now that is what we were thinking. Now the best way for me to tell you, is to sort of say how are we seeing things differently now than we did 6 months ago, right? So 3 big changes. First is 6 months ago, we were worrying about low-income countries that were struggling with debt and slow growth. So we were worried about the fact that low-income countries were not recovering quickly enough, right? So these were countries like Ethiopia, Chad, Zambia, and so on. Now, we're as concerned about middle-income countries. I'm talking about Lebanon and Sri Lanka and Ghana and countries like that. So that's the first difference. So we are as worried now about middle-income countries as we are about low-income countries. So 6 months ago, we were also worried about rising prices in some countries, right? That we were attributing mainly to supply bottlenecks, right? So we thought that there were supply bottlenecks in product markets, and we thought that once these supply bottlenecks there will be a moderation of these prices. Now we are as worried about high inflation in all countries, not just commodity importers, as well as the consequences of these for financial markets, right? The third main difference is that 6 months ago, we were worrying about a slowing recovery and increases in the prices of some of these commodities. Now we are starting to worry about a generalized stagflation. And stagflation is a scary term that brings back bad memories of the mid-70s and lost decades in the 80s and things like that. Yeah. All right. So I think what does this mean for policymakers, right? For essentially, I think it means that policymakers have a more narrow path that they have to sort of traverse through. When you're trying to sort of get through a more narrow path, you tend to need more balance, right? Yeah. Because you could easily fall left or right. And there are 3 types of balances. So the first one is between monetary tightening to fight inflation, which is what you were talking about, as well as strengthening the economic recovery. And I think that the best way to strike this balance is to take a good, hard look at the quality of fiscal spending. And you have to improve fiscal thing because you don't have fiscal space, you don't have monetary space, so you have to improve the quality of spending. But that is difficult, right? The second balance is between quicker growth and things like energy security, right? And the best way perhaps is to do this through more energy efficiency policies, but that's difficult too, okay? And then the third one is between economic efficiency and economic security. And the best way to do this is through integrated trade and capital markets, financial markets. But this is becoming very difficult because of the growing political fragmentation, what Kairat mentioned, the geopolitical tensions and so on, that thing. So let me just end with a quick reflection about what really, especially for Kazakhstan, what is it that I would be more worried about? So I mentioned in the last session that I am actually much more worried not about this year, but about the next decade, you know? Sure. And why are we so concerned about the next decade? So the way that I was sort of thinking about it was I started to work in international development and so on around the early 1990s. And now that I look back upon it, between 1990 and 2016, you probably had the golden age of economic development. You had, you had improvements in living standards, in incomes, and so on. 25 years of progress, amazing progress, and so on. And if you reflect on it, you say, what is it that actually led to that? And there were 2 or 3 things. The first one was a generalized recognition that macroeconomic stability was very important. You shouldn't have high inflation and stuff like that. And we are worried about that now, right? The second thing was that there was a general recognition that it should be the private sector that should take the lead in economic development and growth and so on. right? And so I was very heartened to hear Kairat still talking about a high-quality privatization and things like that. But in general, we start to sort of see that there is a reconsideration of the value of state-owned enterprises, not so much as to sort of occupy the commanding heights of the economy, but much more to sort of think of them as a social stabilizing instrument, that kind of a thing. So that worries me too. And then the third thing, of course, is that if you look back upon this decade, you actually find this was very unusual in the sense that you had complete integration of global markets, or not complete integration, but much more integration of global trade and capital markets, right? Especially after the fall of the wall and so on, you had between 1990 and 2015, you had this great period of essentially multilateral trade agreements and so on, so that poor countries could actually, if they did the first two things, if they instituted a stable macroeconomy and if they made sure that the private sector was unleashed, you actually got a supply response. And what you could do with that supply was you could actually access world markets and so on. But now, because of these geopolitical things, we would all have to worry about whether or not there's this growing fragmentation again. And when the world fragments, it doesn't fragment into two parts. It's not like the West versus Russia and China and so on, because I come from India, and India is saying that we are not going to pick either side. So you end up getting a fragmentation into three, Once you get that, I think that we would have to start to worry about whether or not the next 25 years is going to be nearly as good as the last 25. Let me stop.
Thank you, Dr. Gill. I think you gave a quite a good overview of what the unfolding trend that will affect the global market and especially the Kazakhstan. And I think when you're talking about the middle income and the lower income countries, that's resembles like what we call in the capital markets frontier markets. So I would like to ask Mr. Kunanbayev on what is actually the big money thinking, right? What are the investors thinking? Whether how these global trends affecting them and whether they're still interested in frontier markets and especially in Kazakhstan. Yeah, you just press the button. Yep.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question, and I think it's a highly relevant one in the context of the preceding discussion. Yeah. To answer your first question, clearly the latest events have affected the investor perception of the world, and this is translated in numbers. So let's look at some hard statistics. Despite a very good start to the year, picking up a very strong dynamic from last year, the global IPO market year to date is down by approximately 40%. In terms of the number of transactions and in terms of volume, it's even further than that. It's down by 57%, which is actually quite dramatic given where the market has been last year. If you look at the frontier markets, the situation appears even more grave, with overall number of transactions down by 85%. So it is a very, very sharp decline in the terms of the number of deals and volume of deals that are being done in today's market, which currently reflects, I suppose, the ongoing concerns that investors harbor with respect to the macroeconomic outlook. So these trends come against a very difficult backdrop where you can call it several black swans colliding at the same time. Well, first of all, of course, there are concerns about the global growth, which has only just started to pick up following the pandemic, and which has been dealt a very serious blow by a combination of geopolitical factors, causing further disruption to the supply chains. And then there are inflationary pressures, of which the previous speaker has talked about at length. There are concerns among investors about the potential increases in interest rates globally, and all of that is not a particularly positive sign for the markets. That said, there's also a silver lining, I suppose, to these challenges. We on our end believe that the global recession can be avoided. despite some of the doomsayers having different opinion. We believe that asset valuation declines have been arrested, and we expect to see some gradual recoveries over the course of the next several months. Asia is going to be key to future growth globally, and in particular China, where we think, again, some of the assessments have been largely on the downside, and we expect there to be positive surprises further down the year. Furthermore, we think that some of those interest rate hikes, of which everybody's talking about these days, are already largely priced in the asset valuations, okay? And finally, which is probably a good sign for Kazakhstan, I think there's a consensus among analysts that the commodity exporters are going to benefit from the continuing commodity cycle. So, despite all these challenges, I was really encouraged by Mr. Satkaliev's statement about ongoing efforts to spur privatization in Kazakhstan, and we, as banks, definitely welcome the opportunities that this is going to present to both the investment community as well as intermediaries, as well as the governments worldwide. What would it take to for these privatizations to be successful? We really think it will take a few factors. First of all, we need a little bit of stability, and of course, stability is what everybody is after. First of all, of course, some geopolitical stability is going to be key. Secondly, some market stability, and again, we're already seeing some very encouraging signs of this. And finally, we would all look forward to seeing a few blue chip, top quality transactions being done in the international markets. At that point in time, we would very much expect the interests of global investors towards frontier markets to recover. I mentioned before this 85% decline in the number of IPOs in the frontier market since the beginning of the year. If you talk about this remaining 15%, an interesting fact is that most of them are what we call domestic stories. Okay, there were actually placements in the domestic markets that were primarily supported by domestic investors, and Middle East provides a very, very good example of that. So going forward, we would expect investors in our region to be much more selective than they previously were, at least for the period of time. They will focus on stories that will offer a different risk-reward combination. They will be looking for high-quality, well-orchestrated and well-timed stories. Again, very, very important for the government to be consistent in delivering upon its promise for privatization, equally picking up the right windows and the right stories to place these offerings in the market. Focus remains very much on fundamentals and ESG. Everybody likes these three letters these days. Environmental, social, and governance takes a prevailing tone in investors' assessments of the outlook for the year. So, long story short, I think it is very, very important that we all realize that the local markets will provide a very substantial backup to the international offerings. And once again, this is where we welcome the efforts of the Kazakh government, of AIX, of the Kazakh Stock Exchange in pushing forward with this upcoming privatization to make sure that not only is the wealth of the nation shared with the people, but equally that the companies themselves get an impetus from growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kunanbayev, especially for the optimistic notes, but I have to say that I am generally a glass half full person, so I always look forward for better times. Ms. Zhakayeva, if I may ask, right, you are the global bank on Kazakh market, and Mr. Kunanbayev already started, but I wanted to ask for your view, what we need to do, what needs to be done on our side to actually keep the global investor attention on Kazakhstan and to attract them.
Thank you, Rinat, for your question. For the bank, for global bank operating in Kazakhstan, we are on a daily basis dealing with the foreign investors. And here, when we talk about foreign investors, we talk first of all about foreign direct investors and foreign portfolio investors. We work with both of them. And dealing with them on a daily basis, we hear their feedback, we hear their trends, expectations. If we speak first of all about foreign direct investments, I think here it is important to mention and again to reiterate the success of Kazakhstan. So I think $370 billion of direct investments, it's a really big sizable amount which was attracted during 30 years of independence. And the story is continuing. For instance, in 2021, the size of the direct investments was about $24 billion, which is more than, which is like, I think more than 35% above of 2020 and above the expectation even of the government, which was about, I think, $90 billion. So it is important when we talk daily with our clients, corporates who are representing these investments. The key trends are, first, it is what Timur mentioned, of course, ESG, it is absolutely obvious, digitalization. Also, we hear from them cost optimization, shared services, creation of IT hubs, creation of innovation labs. And this is something which the companies are dealing on a, currently at present times. When we talk about the portfolio investors, the global institutional investors coming who are interested to come to invest to Kazakhstan, first of all, as a complement, as a positive side, I can say that many of them saying that, first of all, no, when compared to other emerging markets, no investment approval is required. It is easy and transparent way to register with tax authorities and get business identification number. So I will say some exact concrete things, feedback. Of course, I appreciate macroeconomic views said here, but what I hear from from the institutional investors on a daily basis. But something which is important to mention is to develop the digital infrastructure. For instance, many of them saying, why, given the distance of these institutional investors in Kazakhstan, when, for instance, a new one wants to come to Kazakhstan, they are facing the still account documentation issues, like why don't we implement more digital, for instance, signatures, international standards like DocuSign, for instance. This issue has been raised by us as an advocate on behalf of the institutional investors and other corporates on the platform of the Foreign Investors Council in the digitalization working group with the Minister of Digitalization. I think it is worth to consider this, and it will improve, it will make easier for them to come and do simple stuff here. Next thing is to consider, for instance, if those investors who are interested to invest into stocks, simple again stuff, why don't we introduce the electronic voting? Currently, we are still on the annual shareholding meetings.
Corporate actions.
Yeah, corporate actions, exactly. Now we are voting by hand, we are coming as representative of these foreign institutional investors. Why don't we introduce this? And as a positive side, I know that in the concept and strategic concept of the central depository, it is there in their strategy of 2022-2024, but these are sometimes simple, but they're really important things which are making life of our institutional investors easier. Next, those investors who are interested to invest into government securities of Kazakhstan. We've done, I think the Ministry of Finance did a good progress of introduction of 1 day a week auction date. Because for investors it is predictable, it is understandable, they are gathering their liquidity, they are coming on a specific date. The next thing is introduction of the yields from 1 to 5 years versus 5-10 years. Again, more attraction, more interesting to come. And using Clearstream settlements, as well as dialogue with the banking sectors, dialogue with the market players. We see that this dialogue is now coming on a frequent basis. But overall, when we speak with the investors, of course, the key message is communication. All the time, they're saying whatever happening on your market, they'd like to know from all of us. It is not a secret when the company, any issuer comes to the market, they talk like 50% of their feedback is more about Kazakhstan than about their company. And I think the example when we did the global investors calls together with the key stakeholders, including Ministry of Finance, National Bank, Ministry of Economy, Samruk-Kazyna, it was a very positive example, and I think that this is something to be continued and will provide more and more visibility of what's happening here. We discussed during the lunch, Rinat, you said that we should bring more people here so that they know what's happening here. Sometimes it is difficult, it's challenging. We will, of course, committed helping with this, but at the same time, we should ourselves to be proactive, coming to the investors and to tell story of Kazakhstan. And as we've heard today, it is a lot to say about Kazakhstan.
Yes, thank you, Saule. Exactly as we've discussed, we can, thank you first of all for your answer. And yeah, we need to communicate regularly, but also hearing from people who travel here, especially first time, they're amazed like by just seeing Astana. Imagine what happens when they see Almaty actually, and how beautiful, and they see the development of the pace in the country. So we should be actually doing at least once a year, bring all the investment community globally here. But anyway, thank you for your thoughts. And I would like to ask Mr. Kaufmann, given your extensive background in equity capital market, in emerging markets, how funds, global funds, are reconsidering their strategies in current global context, and I mean, like the different industries, right? What the new Kazakhstan story, investment story, around what industries we could spin it? What do you think the interesting industries for the investors, please?
Okay, first, just let me say, Renat, it's really good to be back here after 2.5 years. I was last year in November 19, and all of this that's happened in the meantime was unimaginable. Then finally we have COVID behind us, and then we have the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which clearly presents for you, like everybody, it's a challenge for everybody. There are very few countries in the whole world where this is just an opportunity. But it's bigger in some way challenges to you because of your situation and the whole relations between Russia and Kazakhstan and the balance that you've very successfully trod all this time. But actually, because of the resources in particular that you have here, it's actually quite a good opportunity relatively. There's a lot of other countries where it's just a challenge. I mean, there's no good way out. They just have to weather the storm and keep their head down. And I think the other aspect of, the obvious opportunity is you've got oil and gas, everyone wants oil and gas. The problem you've got is transport, and you no longer have Russian rail and ports to get it out, and it's going to take time to develop those alternatives. On the other hand, it's forcing you, we've heard diversification as a buzzword, it's forcing you to diversify faster than you would have been doing. And that's good, and it's also, I think, forcing you, encouraging you to find other ways of developing your economy. You've got a young economy. One of your advantages, there are a lot of other resource-rich countries in the world where there are hundreds of millions of people, and that's a problem. You've got under 20 million people and all these resources. So it's actually much easier, I think, for you to reform, to do the economic reforms and really get an immediate kind of social and economic return. Going back to what Mr. Satkaliyev was announcing on the sort of people's domestic IPOs and what Kunanbayev said, I was in the UK Treasury in the 1980s when Mrs. Thatcher did the privatization, and then I was in Schroders, which then became part of Citi, where we did some of these big UK privatizations. And I've then privatized Eastern Europe. Where it works best is when you do what you're doing. Vouchers are a terrible idea because they're not worth anything in the hands of ordinary people, and they get accumulated in a few people, and then they're worth something, but then they are no longer in the people's hands. So putting shares in the hands of the population has worked really well wherever it's been tried. It worked in the UK, it worked in Poland. They didn't do it so much in the Czech Republic, so the capital markets in the Czech Republic are not as vibrant as in the Polish market. So, before you were going more the international and domestic way. Now you're kind of being forced to do the domestic way. That's going to be good for you. It's going to be good for the country and the development of its markets. So there's a benefit of these changes and these challenges which are confronting you. Your resources, also special metals, they're an opportunity. They come with logistical challenges, which are also, you're going to have to invest. That's also, in a way, also good for the economy. I think it's, you're very adept. You've had to tread the sort of path between China and Russia. It's obviously much more critical now. The pressure from Russia is greater. And that's why you see that in the Kazatomprom share price. Uranium price is up 10%, share price is down 30%. So maintaining your balance is going to be really important for international investors. They're going to be very concerned to see you able to maintain your independence, keep that balance. And then there's an opportunity just in that discount unwinding. And also, that discount is going to affect whatever people invest in. So whatever new activities you're going to be trying to bring in international investors in, you don't want them to be coming in at such a big discount. So in addition to sort of resources and logistics, transport, renewable energy was the first thing we had put down, and then I heard your announcement about separating out Samruk energy into a green energy, and then putting the nasty, smelly, dirty coal somewhere separate. It's a great idea, and the time has come for that. That's a really good thing to do. Agriculture, financial services, tourism. There's actually a lot of potential here for tourism. Whenever anyone comes to Kazakhstan, they're amazed at what you have, exactly. And the landscape and the country and the variety as well. And technology. Kaspi is an extraordinary story, and it's really showing what can be done with technology in terms of leapfrogging sort of stages of development. My colleague Ildar over there, he's a research analyst. He thinks you've got fantastic opportunities in blockchain, and that's leaving aside what's happening with crypto and all the turbulence, volatility there. As a technology for traditional finance to use, it has potential. You've got a human capital here. You've got pioneering companies here. You've got cheap energy. I think you've been investing in data mining. Sorry, not data mining. Crypto mining, blockchain mining. Here, that's a natural advantage you have. Sort of offshoot of business development and tourism. This fantastic centre here, which blows your mind when you first see it. Trade fairs and conventions. Even duty-free shopping. I mean, you don't have the beach like they have in Dubai, but maybe you have an international financial center. Maybe there's something to be done there. So I think challenges clearly, but a kickstart for your diversification, and there are lots of areas I think where international investors can invest and where you have lots of advantages.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for sharing that thoughts. And I think we are almost finishing. So as a closing remark, I would like every speaker, to give a very short statement. So I would start from me, The world economic is very dynamic. So the worst is behind. Or am I being too optimistic? Who would like to start on this?
I'm going to go first because I'm Mr. Gloom. And then other people can cheer you up. I would say I am gloomy, not so much about Kazakhstan, but about the whole world. But I think Kazakhstan is actually going to be one of the places best situated if there is a recession, a global recession, and really difficult times. I think you'll be in one of the best places to pick up because you have got resources, you've got a small population, you're reforming really well, and you've got lots of opportunities. But that's on the other side of what I see. So I really hope you're right, Timur, or your bank is right, because I think inflation is going to be higher even still than people think. I think interest rates are going to be a lot higher than people expect. And when interest rates go up, then, even if the shocks that cause this are external, and it wasn't like in 2008 finance, it really hurts, and asset values fall. But it's not just asset values fall, incomes fall, combination of inflation, price inflation without wage inflation going up. Corporate income falls. I don't think, PEs are down, but I think earnings are going to be lower. Corporate earnings are going to be lower than people expect. I think there will be recessions that are going to be painful. And what is like in 2008 is there's a lot of debt out there. It's maybe not so much in the banks, and the banks are better capitalized than they were, but a lot of non-bank financial institutions. I'm looking at Patrick's face. And that's gonna be painful. But I'm the negative guy, yeah. So.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to? Yes, please, Mr. Satkaliyev.
I'm also optimistic, but pragmatically. I believe that Kazakh economy is resilient to current crisis, and at this stage of economic cycle, we have to stress attention on the investment into infrastructure and utilities, and new energy basket by construction, new alternative power plants and renewables, into agri-tech, into investment into human capital. And all of these investments will create a stable foundation for future sustainable economic growth and inclusivity. And Samruk-Kazyna, as a part of new Kazakhstan concept, must be leader of this process. Thank you.
Definitely, thank you. I think, Mr. Minister, you have to go for the next session, right?
Let me just comment on this, and then I'll leave with your permission. So just wanted to say that last week the government approved the new concept of investment policy by 2026, which is based on 3 pillars. One of them is the rule of law and forming the stable and predictable investment climate. The second one is the development of private sector, including, so it will be based mostly on ESG, and also it includes the development of financial and funding market, including the AIFC, and taking into account what we've already heard today about the IPO of our leading national oil and gas company, and there will be other companies in the future. So this will be one of the pillars as well. And the third one is also the use and increase of our internal potential. Kazakhstan has vast resources, and we should also take them into consideration. So not just using the natural resources, but make the deepest, using the more up-to-date technologies, and making the deepest, investment in developing developing this, in making this value added the most that we can, and in general. So we should use, and I always say that starting from February events in general, that we should use these opportunities. This is time for an opening window for opportunities, and I think now everyone is talking about this, and we should definitely here to capture those chances, not only from the side of the government, but for the businesses and from the side of global investors in general. So here we are, and we are already also from the side of the government to help the investors to do business in Kazakhstan. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Kuantyrov. Anyone would like to make even more statements forward-looking?
Perhaps if I can comment on what Nick and Mr. Satkaliyev has said earlier, I will certainly put myself in kind of a neutral camp. And I think Mr. Satkaliyev struck a very important note, calling Kazakhstan's economy resilient. And I think that is indeed a critical signature of Kazakhstan's economy in the present challenging and volatile environment. That said, this resilience should not allow us rest on our laurels. And this reminds me of a conversation I have had a few years back with one of the most senior government officials in this country, who said, listen, it's easy to market Kazakhstan when things are good, when oil prices are over $100 a barrel, etc. But then it becomes very difficult to do things, okay? Because things are good, everybody's comfortable where they are, no need to change things, no need to take risks, etc. I actually happen to think that this present environment, where on one hand Kazakhstan has the resource and can benefit from an ongoing commodity cycle, and on the other hand is faced with a difficult set of circumstances externally, presents a great opportunity for the country to present itself, really, and to execute what has long been promised. One final comment, perhaps. I think if we at JP Morgan and Saule at Citi were not believers in the future of this country, we probably wouldn't be here, right? We wouldn't be doing business. So that is certainly, to us, a sign of commitment of what is to come.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, please, Mr. Baimagambetov.
Maybe I also add something. Yeah, I hope, Rinat, you're right, and maybe the worst is behind us, but we should remember that every time when we too much optimistic, some views are changing or some black swans happened. And for example, last year, I maybe as a central banker every time talk about the inflation, but really the major central banks discuss a lot about the temporary nature of the high inflation. Now we see discussions about the risk of de-anchoring of inflation expectations and inflation spiral. For example, another post-COVID recovery is going well, but black swan happened, and now we see the geopolitical conflict in Ukraine and food crisis, possible food crisis, and disruption of supply chain. That's why I believe we don't have a crystal ball, and we cannot foresee the future. But what we can do, we can set up a sound policy mix, and it's a key for sustainable economic growth and ability to absorb the economic shocks. That's why it's like a prudent fiscal rule, independent monetary policy, smart and less regulation to businesses. From my point of view, less subsidies to the businesses, but more market competition. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, of course. Yeah, that's also like when we talk about not institutional, but retail investor, what we say is discipline, a lot of the time, I think 90% beats the talent, right, especially on the investment market. Anyway, other comments?
Yeah, I would echo to the speakers here that resilience is a key word. Kazakhstan demonstrated resilience towards the shocks, and I think we have all grounds to expect that Kazakhstan should succeed, given the plans just said by Minister of Economy, also by Deputy Governor of the National Bank, and there is no other way just to use the new opportunities.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dr. Gill, would you add anything?
Well, the only thing I would add is I'm actually optimistic about economic policies, because I think that we have seen the effect of really bad economic policies, like when, for example, central banks start to worry about things that they shouldn't worry about and stop worrying about things that they should, right? So I think those lessons will be learned and economic policy will be better. I am pessimistic about geopolitics along the lines of what people were saying. And I think that could derail, I think that could actually limit the potential of the world over the next 2 or 3 decades. But who knows, I hope I'm wrong. So I hope I'm right about the first and wrong about the second. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the speakers, and can we give one round of applause for our speakers? I think it was, my personal view, a very good discussion, and if we are about to remember one thing from this session, KMG IPO is happening this year. Thank you. Our next panel will start in a half an hour with some of the listed companies and some potential to be listed companies. So thank you, and see you in a half hour. It's at 4. sorry, it will start in just a few minutes. Lost track of the time. We start the next session in a few minutes. I'm sorry, I've lost the time actually.